everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's Appraisal Buzzcast, brought to you by Appraiser Learning. We're so excited for today's episode. It's going to be a great one, and it's going to be one that you're going to want to listen to before you finish your next appraisal report. Let's start off by introducing Hal Humphreys from Appraiser Learning. Hal, how are you doing?
Jim, I am doing great today. Really happy to be here. Glad that you're here again today, too.
Well, Hal, do you know the old George Carlin bit, 7 dirty words you can't say on television?
I know it by heart.
I figured, well, we'll keep our podcast E-rated, so we won't go through it right now. But we're going to be talking about something that appraisers need to know before they do their appraisal forms and fill out their next appraisal. And we're talking with Scott Reuter, Chief Appraiser at Freddie Mac, to discuss this topic, avoiding problematic words and phrases in your appraisals.
Scott, welcome.
Hey, good morning. Hi, Hal. Hi, Jim. Thanks for the invitation to join you today.
Really good to have you here. I know who you are. I think everybody else out there knows who you are, but just for the sake of, continuity, tell us kind of your background, who you are, where you come from, how you got into this crazy business of valuation.
Yeah, so the last question first. My dad was an appraiser, so God rest his soul. I'll kind of playfully blame him, but no, I got exposed to the industry through my dad. First half of my career, which is getting long tooth now, was as a fee appraiser. And, so I was in the field like a lot of our fee appraisers out there. Last half of my career kind of on the bank and the lending side up to and including joining Freddie Mac almost 7 years ago now.
Wow. I tell people when they ask me how long I've been in this business, like my whole life. I was holding the dumb end of the tape for my dad when I was like 12 and 13 years old.
Yeah, that's a common thread, right?
Yeah. So, there's been a lot of talk recently in the press and in the appraisal circles about bias in appraisals and avoiding certain words and phrases in appraisal reports and best practice. Scott, why is this so terribly important?
Well, I think that's a great setup for the question, right? So I think it's always been important is a part of effective communication, and I think it's tremendously important now. There's a lot more eyes on our industry. There's a lot more eyes on appraisers and appraisal reports, and much of the problematic language we're seeing in report just simply isn't necessary, and it's not helpful. And today's buzzcast, if nothing more, is just a polite reminder to our fellow appraisers. I'm an appraiser. You're an appraiser. Just that we can really work hard to ensure that we're being careful about our language, and it is really just problematic, right? In terms of words that aren't helpful, and two of the words we're seeing that trip very frequently are desirable and attractive, and these are words that really kind of are meaningless to the development of an appraisal report. I mean, if you and I, on air or off air, challenge each other with what desirable is, I think we'd have a tough conversation. I think, in fairness to appraisers, I think in their own mind that many of them know what they're trying to say. It's just not helpful to the reader. And again, in this environment, any veiled or subjective language can really undermine the credibility of the appraisal report.
Yeah. I've been teaching a course on appraisal review, and Scott, you're going to love this. I put together this fake appraisal report where I worked on properties in the Shire. One of them was on Rivendale Lane. The other was on Baggins Drive, and did this whole analysis. And I had a discussion in there about, this house was ransacked by highwaymen looking for a family heirloom, apparently a ring. And I didn't think about it when I crafted that little story just to explain why the house was in such bad condition. But one of the people in my review class said, Hal, why use the word highwaymen? It doesn't have anything to do with the real estate. It doesn't further the story. And it hit me. I was like, that's the kind of stuff we do as appraisers. We try to tell a story and don't really consider what has an impact on value and what does not.
Yeah, and you're spot on. And I think it's you step back and look at it, it's rather straightforward. but it's not necessarily easy. And I say that in, coming from 35 plus years myself. And you're right. And we've come from an environment where, prose and subjective language and narrative have been such a part of our reports, and we think we're telling a story. But I think if you revisit anything you've written prior to hitting send in these days and really look at it, again, much of the wording is way too subjective and non-factual. And I think that's really directionally where we're trying to go is, and again, it takes a discipline. I'm not here to suggest it's something easy and then we need to move on. Just really work hard. One of the things that we also see are even in descriptions of subject area, where appraisers will describe something as convenient or within walking distance. And I was guilty of it back in the day too. Just, well, everyone knows what that means. Well, most people might, but I think that's the problem is even in that simple statement, you're exercising your own judgment and opinion on convenience and walkability. We had a back and forth with an appraiser last week. I was at a conference and challenged me on, well, what should we say? I said, well, look, in every instance, take that extra moment to see if there's a more factual way that you can describe that. So instead of the subject property is located within walking distance of an elementary school, maybe you say an elementary school is located a 1/10 of a mile from the subject, period. So then we've eliminated our perception of convenience, our opinion on walkability, and it's just, that is a factual statement. And I think most of what we describe in the report can be described factually. And I just think that's a discipline that we appraisers really need to kind of double down and take seriously now.
Yeah, and and I think a lot of folks out there know that I am also a private investigator and have had a fairly lengthy career as an investigator. And you've heard this on the investigative world, just the facts, ma'am, just the facts. At the end of the day, the opinion we're being paid for as appraisers is our professional, analyzed, calculated, derived opinion of value for a piece of property. These other things that are not factual, they're subjective. There is a factual way to say these things.
Absolutely. And I'll throw one more log on the fire, Hal, a little bit, is it as a reminder. It's also called out in our published collateral policy in our seller servicer guide as an unacceptable appraisal practice to use certain subjective terms or veiled language when describing a property or a subject area. So that's really the centerpiece of why we're putting and devoting a lot of our appraisal quality monitoring efforts in this direction. Is it's actually a guide violation. So that's another kind of dimension to the polite reminder, is that just be aware. We updated our policy in, I think, October of last year, and I think our friends across the river have very similar language. I don't ever want to speak for them, but I think there's consistency in that, just this level of awareness. And as we're on this journey and in the time that we're in now, I just think it's good. It's good discipline for appraisers to take some time, particularly now when things are slower. I know it's not great to have such a slowdown in work volume, but it can allow a little bit of time to look for language that maybe in templates that you use frequently. We've all cloned reports before. I mean, appraisers, you've gotten very good with building efficiencies into the process where they can. The problem is that can be a trapdoor and an open door for importing a lot of language that was either in an old report or could just create a problem going forward.
Yeah, and one of the things I did in prepping for this interview is I did a little bit of research on bad words and appraisals, what not to say, those kind of things. And one of the reminders that I saw was focus on the property, not the residents. We're appraising a piece of property. Who lives there? Certain statistical things don't really matter. Focus on appraising the property. Can you give us some ideas? You've done a little bit of this, but how is an appraiser supposed to describe and identify certain features of a subject neighborhood in thinking about not using subjective language?
Yeah, I would say the one that comes to mind is the one I already shared. Just if convenience, walkability. Again, even back to a conference I was at last year, and I was in a pretty spirited back and forth with an appraiser on the word desirable. Pardon me, they're ready to kind of die on the hill of desirable, knowing in their mind what they meant, but again, not really understanding what the readers of their report might understand that to be, or what they could possibly read into it in any way. In this back and forth, I challenged them. I said, okay, now think of an area in the market you appraise that you would currently or previously have described as desirable. And they're like, okay, I got it. I said, now what characteristics of that area add value that, or potentially might add value to interested purchasers? Well, I mean, and then all the things came out. It was in the DC area. Here you can, it's less than a half mile from the metro. It's this close to highway access. It's this many parks. And I said, then you need to say that. Again, this whole discipline to just, I like your Just the Facts, man. That was an old TV show. I'm old enough to remember it. But yeah, just as much as you can, just the facts. And I think our new, so if you take a step back, Hal, and I know you and I've had these discussions too, in just kind of broader lens, I think the whole industry is kind of moving this way too. And one of the big elements is the UAD redesign. It's AKA the forms redesign, but I've said many times, the good news is we're not creating another static form for the industry to now, get outdated quickly. It's a new data standard and data set. And I think those discrete data elements that we appraisers are then going to be interacting with will kind of be the baseline. That'll kind of force us to describe maybe not everything, but very, very high into the 80, 90th percentile, whatever, most of the report through discrete data elements. And gone will be a lot of the free-form text, narrative, and potential subjectivity that can come into the report. There still will be, and I've seen the mock-ups from the joint team, which they put in a tremendous amount of effort, but I've seen mock-ups of the new form that will be derived out of this new data process. But there still will be areas that the appraiser can comment, and of course appraisers are going to need to provide some commentary from time to time. Gone will be the big open parking lot field of the report addendum where we appraisers put everything under the sun, and a lot of the commentary will be associated in the report we view where it's going to be needed. So if there's a shared driveway or an easement or whatever the appraiser wants to provide some additional commentary on, they can certainly do that. But I think I say all that to say I think that's a dramatic shift from where we're at now, where the open field environment is pretty much the form, and we pull up the form and begin to tell the story. I think it's going to change dramatically, and it plays in to the topic today that, if we can begin now that discipline getting away from, again, less subjectivity, more objectivity, more fact, less opinion, I think that's just going to put appraisers on much more solid footing.
Yeah, I love it. And, the mock-ups of the new form builder and getting away from, I used to talk about, my dad started using the URAR form when it first came out, and it was, glue bound on a card stock, and it came with a fishing worm attached to it. And we've been shoehorning information into this arcane report for a long time. So the new UAD is a pretty exciting thing. I think it's going to be interesting to see how that unfolds. I'm going to take a second and give a shout out to one of our sponsors, and after that, Scott and I will come back and continue our conversation.
Since 1978, LIA Administrators and Insurance Services has been offering E&O insurance to valuation professionals. LIA applies superior customer service, exceptional liability education from Peter Christensen, and unparalleled claim defense managed by Claudia Gaglioni. LIA offers errors and omissions, commercial bonds, general liability, cyber liability, and real estate agents and brokers E&O. Visit liability.com or call 800-334-0652.
Welcome back. I'm Hal Humphreys, and I'm sitting here with Scott Reuter from Freddie Mac. And we were just before the break talking about the new UAD and how reports are going to be built in the future. And I can tell you, if you're curious about this, join us at Valuation Expo, August 7 through 9. And I can tell you a little birdie has told us that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are going to be demoing and introducing the new UAD at Valuation Expo, and we're pretty excited about that. Scott, let me ask you a question. Does Freddie Mac monitor appraisal reports for the type of language we've been talking about? Do you guys pay attention to that, and how do you do that?
Yeah, we absolutely do, and it's a dimension of really our regular examination of appraisal reports that we conduct as part of our risk management routines. So we currently look for, patterns of appraisal development that may impact quality, consistency or inconsistency in reporting of subject property or property characteristics, Q and C ratings. Our systems consume all of this as a part of our oversight. And the dimension as it reaches unacceptable language, again, has been included. We're doing more text detection just to see where these words may be prevalent in reports. I will say, it's like a lot of things on a quality basis. It's more about patterns and trends to us than one report. So you submitted a report to us, Hal, and it's got one or two words and gets flagged, and the bulk of the balance of your work that we may look at does not. That may concern us less than a pattern of usage. And again, at this point, you're going to get a reminder. We'll direct message to the appraisers around, the fact that we did see it. And we're kind of on a journey here too, because some words in their use are not absolute. So there's contextual uses of words that matter. And again, we're trying to. The good news is we're a team of appraisers, so we look at this through appraisal eyes as much as anything to really be fair. And again, it's just part of the output of these efforts are just a communication that it's unacceptable, and hopefully appraisers do have an opportunity to review their routines and improve their report writing to be a little bit more effective.
I liked what you brought up in the first segment about, I know business has slowed across the country for a lot of appraisers, and that provides an opportunity. Scott, you and I have both been involved in this business long enough to see it go up and see it go down and see it go up and see it go down. It's just the nature of the appraisal business. When it does go down, when things slow down, that's an opportunity to take some time and look at your forms, look at your templates, and try to figure out some of the things where you might have some problematic language. It's an opportunity to do some education or go to a conference that you wouldn't normally have done and learn about these things. Any tips or suggestions from you for appraisers on how to help them identify issues and correct them?
I think you've already hit on the one. I would take the advantage of the slowdown or a little bit of the slower pace to take time to review that language that's embedded in any cloned reports or templates. And I guess the other thing too is just a practical reminder. We appraisers are responsible for the information contained in our reports. And I would say the other dimension to that too is look for any narrative, maybe from third-party sources, that may get imported into our report. Common example that comes to mind is the MLS. There may be comments that an agent or realtor might have used in marketing a property that may not be a word that the appraiser would be comfortable just putting in the report. Talk to a couple of the prominent attorneys that we both know in this space that represent appraisers when things kind of go to the far end, and copy and pasting Wikipedia neighborhood descriptions and anything from an outside source that you're really not aware of and don't take time to review. That is an open door for a lot of unacceptable wording that, again, the appraiser at the end of the day is responsible for. They're included in their report.
I'm glad you brought up Wikipedia because I've seen a number of times in my review work, appraisers will block and copy from Wikipedia for the neighborhood description. Two things to think about. Number one, there's data included in Wikipedia that you do not want in your report. Just you don't want it in there. It will fall right against all the guidelines. Number two, and I think appraisers need to be aware of this, Wikipedia is made available to block and copy sections of it, but it is done under a Creative Commons licensing. You have to cite the source of that information. You can't just block and copy it and take credit for it. So I've seen appraisers get in trouble for plagiarism, for just block and copying from Wikipedia. So, again, number one, some of the language in there will not work for appraisers. And number two, if you're going to do that, cite the source. I'm going to take a second real quick, Scott, and go to another shout out to one of our sponsors, and then we'll come back and finish up our conversation.
The Appraisal Institute recently launched its Instagram page, AI's latest presence on social media, joining Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, and the Face Value podcast. Visit and follow AI's Instagram page for another way to access valuation news and association updates. www.instagram.com/appraisalinstitute.
And welcome back. I'm Hal Humphreys. I'm sitting here with Scott Reuter from Freddie Mac. Scott, real quick, we've talked about appraisers, what they can do to kind of monitor themselves and check on their language or using their reports. We've talked about what Freddie Mac does to monitor and send out notices to appraisers if they've got some problematic language. How can lenders help in this process? Are there things that lenders can do specifically to help out?
Absolutely. That's a great question, Hal. I mean, our lender clients always play an important role for us at Freddie Mac, and we have begun to, message and make sure we are fully aligned. A, they're aware. B, that we're aligned in the screening that we're doing here for the words and phrases. They can work, to your question, they can work directly to enhance their QC routines to help with that alignment. And again, our intention is to not only ensure we're aligned, but if there is any correction or any messaging needed, that it's going back to the appraiser as few times as possible. That's a way to say they can catch things on the front end before they hit our QC and oversight routines, which would be then just duplicitous of their efforts. So that's number one. Two, as we continue to expand and enhance our appraisal quality monitoring partnership, lenders will be an important part of that, and so that's also in that response is another message to appraisers that you may also hear from lenders on this, and that also may be proactive and maybe not necessarily great, but good that they're providing some level of screening on the report to ensure the most credible, compliant appraisal reports get delivered to Freddie Mac.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, we're not looking to bust appraisers. We're not looking to get people in trouble. We're looking to make this profession better.
Absolutely. Our mutual friend Danny Wiley's got a great line. He's like, "We're not out busting kneecaps just to do it," and we're not. It's really all the whole spirit of this, and why I love talking to you and Jim and the team is it's friendly reminders. It's what I would want to hear if I rewound the clock and I'm back in the field. Look, here's a friendly reminder. Here's something that we're seeing. Here, this is problematic. It undermines the credibility of a report. And going forward, it's going to, potentially amplify. And a lot of folks are looking at this as potential signal for bias in appraisal reports. And if that's not really the intent, then I think it's language that's not helpful. And, appraisers can really work with us to double down and ensure their appraisals comply with our guide requirements.
Do you remember, Scott, the magazine back in the day called The Communicator? When I was young in this business, working with Mike Ishii and MAI here in Nashville as an apprentice, he took that magazine and he said, our job is to communicate our analysis to our intended users. We are to communicate it. And all of this falls into the category of effective, efficient communication. And look, I'm out in the field on a fairly regular basis doing appraisals. I got a call from a national bank a couple of months ago. I'd used a definition that had the word desirable in it, and I didn't even notice it. And they pointed it out, and we made a correction, got it taken care of. It's not a huge deal to take a minute, stop, think, and consider and review your work before you send it out. Always good policy. Scott, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. It's always a pleasure to see you and have you on. I'm going to bring Jim back into the room real quick. Hello, Jim.
Hi, guys. Before you go, we want to do our anonymous appraiser question. We've been getting a lot of people writing in. You can reach out at comments@appraisalbuzz.com, and we'll ask your question to a future smart person. Right now, we have Scott Reuter and Hal Humphreys to answer this question. This is from somebody in a location that had recently had a wildfire. And they said, I have a property on 5 acres that survived a large wildfire, leaving burned trees to the back and a view on one side for many acres. It was previously heavy timber prior to the fire, and now it's just charred matchsticks. The barn was burned out, but not the house. None of the land sales are located within the burned area. What are you seeing as external obsolescence, if any, in wildfire areas?
Well, I'll take a stab at it first. What I'll say is I live in Tennessee. We don't have a whole lot of wildfires in my part of Tennessee. Is there possibly external obsolescence due to a wildfire? It might be. At the end of the day, my suggestion is go out and analyze the market and see if the market is recognizing that. I've talked to people in California who have lost homes in certain neighborhoods due to forest fires, and what they ended, and these are appraiser friends, what they ended up doing was getting sales that were not affected by a fire and getting sales that were affected by a fire, maybe not in necessarily similar areas, but they were able to derive a percentage adjustment and address it that way. That's one approach. I've seen that done in floodland sales. But at the end of the day, it's really the appraiser's job to look at it and analyze the market and see if the market is acknowledging a change in value due to that change in scenery. Scott?
Yeah, no, I like I'm glad you went first. It always takes me a while to process, but I think I like your answer. It's an area, it needs to be evidenced by the market reaction. So I think you're spot on. And I like the exercise to get a subset of sales that were and were not affected and see if the market's telling you something. So I think that's the key. It would also, a lot of other ifs and dependencies here, how large and widespread, and to your point, what was the immediate market reaction to that, and as it begins to, markets begin to resuscitate, like post wildfire in this example. One thing I'm happy to do, I know this is kind of a new feature, but I'm happy to take that question back into our team at Freddie and see if there's any response different from that, or may expand on that I'd share back with you and Jim to share with this appraiser. I mean, we got a team of appraisers that, like a lot of appraisers, they all have points of view. So let's see if there's anything else that they could share that might be helpful.
I think that would be fantastic if we can get the Freddie Mac Brain Trust to come back with some suggestions. That could be incredibly helpful, as opposed to just listening to Hal saying this is what I might do. Great idea, Scott. Thank you for offering that.
No, you're welcome.
Well, thank you, Scott, and that's why you're one of our favorite guests, as always. We really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us today, and thank you, Hal, for everything. Thanks to our listeners and our sponsors for helping us put these on. Hal, I'll hand it over to you for the final word.
Well, Jim, again, thank you for hosting today. Scott, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate you being here. It's always nice to have you on and share your knowledge. And again, this is just a chance to remind us appraisers out there in the field to think about how we're reporting and the words we're using and what impact they may have. I'm Hal Humphreys. On behalf of Jim Morrison and Scott Reuter, that is your Appraisal Buzzcast. We'll see you next week.